Now, Gareth Bale's served up some interesting quotes about his time at Real Madrid. He says a lot of players go to Real Madrid and it's like the glitz and the glamour, and I never was like that. I just wanted to go there, play football and go home. I never would want to go do interviews all the time. I'd have to sometimes. I just never wanted the kind of circus that goes with it. I just wanted to play football and go home and be with my family. Said it's interesting, amongst that answer, he cites the fact that he left a game early and it was he who was on the front page of Marca as opposed to other players who did exactly the same thing, feeling that he was picked on by the media.
Yeah, and obviously, look, the starting point of what he says there is entirely true, by the way. You see it in his behaviour, you see it when behaviour is quite a loaded word. I actually think I don't quite like using the word behaviour, but you saw it in the way that he acted in the time that he was in Spain. He wasn't interested in that. He wasn't interested in the nonsense. It's just not in his personality. And he was perfectly entitled, by the way, to have that personality. I've always thought it was remarkable, really, that essentially the things that they attacked Gareth Bale for, and you thought, wow, these are just the most minor crimes on the planet. People would say, oh, isn't it terrible he plays golf? Oh my God, he plays golf. What a terrible thing to do. And then there was that one where the team went out for a meal and he didn't go, and everyone said, this is terrible. Now look, for what it's worth, I personally think it probably helps you to go for a meal with your teammates. It probably helps you to engage with them and so on. But essentially, he was being accused of not being a bad lad, of not going out, of being a guy that wanted to stay at home and look after himself. I mean, it was like, if these really are the worst crimes you can come up with, I mean, it's really, really terrible. And he did, I think, at times, possibly need to play the game a little bit more. In fact, remember, a couple of years ago when he was asked on the television if he had any advice for Jude Bellingham, and he said, play the game. There are bits of the media that maybe will want to speak to you. You need to play the game. You need to be able to kind of be part of that environment. And I thought that he said that from a position of regret. I thought he said that from a position in which he'd realised that he hadn't played the game. And it should have been enough for him to just play football, but it wasn't. Now, it is true, because I don't want this to be a whitewashing of Gareth Bale. It is true that in the last couple of years, his performance level wasn't that good. It is true that there was a period, particularly after Real Madrid had reneged on an agreement to let him go to China, where he'd had enough, where he wasn't interested, where he was angry, in fact, at the way that he felt that Real Madrid as a club had behaved, and in the way in which then the media reflected that. And I think that's where he sees himself as having been picked on a little bit. And that moment when he left the game early, when he should have been sitting in the stands and watching it, everyone waded in on him. And again, you sort of think, wow, is that really the worst crime you can come up with? That he left a game early to avoid a bit of traffic? And I think he had a point, but it is true that in truth, and it kind of saddens me a little bit to see it like this, that he was probably at Real Madrid for 18 months too long. But, when we take a step back and we look at his career here, he was phenomenally successful.
When you think glitz and glamour, you think Nedum. What do you make of this, Nedum?
I'm glad you came to me, Dan. Let me tell you about my time going to QPR. I think, to be honest, I'm glad that Sid's been talking about, say, the highs and the lows of his time at Real Madrid. Some of the stuff that's really unfair, and other things which, like maybe he did stay there for too long. Seeing him just essentially be a sub, in some of those later rounds of the Champions League and so on, that's not really the guy who we remember having so many key moments in the more recent history of, what is essentially the biggest club in world football. And where I would sort of say that, like, it doesn't necessarily sit right in my mind, like, no player has to go anywhere. And I think when you think about Real Madrid, it's not just the football. It is what it is to be a Madridista. It's that white shirt. It's what it stands for. It's the unique nature, the history of it all. And I think that in some ways, if you are to be going there, that's the type of thing that you need to be ready to embrace. Because I think in some ways, to be an introvert, it's not really the best place to go to be at Real Madrid, to be completely honest with you. But that being said, as Sid said, he's one of the most successful players that's been there in that time. Some of the moments that he's had, the memories that he'll have, his significance to, say, football there as a Welshman as well. It's tremendous, but like, to be stunned by what goes on at Real Madrid in terms of the scale and the magnitude of it all and the glitz, the glamour, the bright lights. I don't know, man. It almost feels a little bit naive, to be honest, but who am I? Who am I to say that, he made the wrong decision? Because clearly he's had a tremendous career.
I'm with Nedum in that you kind of you would think to expect that, to know to expect that from Real Madrid. I mean, we talk about it all the time, not just in terms of players, in terms of managers, the politics of the football club is like no other. And I think that comes with it. Listen, at the same time, while I say that, from a footballing perspective, when you're involved in the game, you think that the only thing that matters is what happens on the park. That you turn up for training on time, you train hard during the week, and you put in those performances on the weekend. That should be all that counts. Gareth Bale did that. But Real Madrid are unique. Probably no other club comes anywhere close to matching Real Madrid in those off-field expectations. What's needed to be done in terms of just continue to promote the brand. So naive is the word Nedum used, which I think perfectly encapsulates this.
Final word on you about this, Sid?
Yeah, just to pick up on what Shaka's saying there, and I think we do need to be honest about those last couple of years, and that is that Gareth Bale didn't perform particularly brilliantly on the pitch, and that there were reasons why, whether Zidane was right or not, Zidane didn't want him in the team, and so it wasn't just about the noise around him, it wasn't just about the things that were being said about him, it was about his contribution on the pitch. But Gareth, I think, felt that some of that was very unfair. The year that he scored that incredible overhead kick in the final of the Champions League, in around about springtime, he dropped out of the team. I think I remember it being against PSG on Valentine's Day, and he dropped out of the team and he didn't get in. And in March, April time, he genuinely couldn't understand it. It wasn't that he thought, this is deeply unfair. He actually couldn't understand it. Well, why aren't I being given at least some opportunities? And Zidane had decided against it. And actually, the best of those 3 Zidane seasons, when they won 3 Champions Leagues, was possibly the one that they were missing Bale for injury in the middle one, and Isco started playing brilliantly. So I think I think Bale has been phenomenal at Real Madrid. But it is true that those last 2 years, the on the pitch part of it as well, wasn't quite there.